Hello, I'm Dr. Reynolds, and this is the Week 1 lecture for English 5220 Technical Writing at Northwestern State University. Today we're going to talk a little bit about defining technical writing. Technical writing as a professional field, as an academic discipline, as something we do as writers, as well as those things that are produced that we call technical writing. So what exactly is technical writing? Here we have a definition from Sid Dobrin, Christopher Keller, and Christian Weiser's Technical Communication in the 21st Century, which was a book published by Pearson and used quite widely in the 2010s, late 2000s. So communication about complex, highly detailed problems, issues, or subjects in the professional world, which helps audiences visualize and understand information so they can make informed and ethical decisions or take appropriate and safe actions. So let's break that down a little bit. We see the idea of communication, right? So when we talk about technical writing, more generally, we talk about technical communication nowadays, so that writing includes multimedia and multimodal ways of communicating information, and about complex, highly detailed problems. We're going to talk a lot about the issue of problem solving and how technical writing is about solving problems through writing. Issues or subjects in the professional world. There's that word professional. So technical writing is not all writing, right? But a lot of writing nowadays takes place in the professional world, which helps audiences visualize and understand information. You'll see that word visualize. It reminds us that technical writing is more than just words on a page, but can include other media as well, whether that's visual representations of information or, of course, words. And we'll talk about other forms that technical writing might take as we progress through the class. But also this idea of helping audiences, that these documents exist so audiences can use them. We'll talk about usability studies as we work our way through the course. So they can make informed and ethical decisions. There's a word ethical there, and ethical simply means right or wrong. So informed, giving them the information they need so they can make their own correct decisions or take appropriate and safe actions. The idea of appropriateness, of course, suggests that context matters. Different things are appropriate in different contexts. And safe actions suggest the role of technical writing in industrial workspaces where safety matters. Safety matters everywhere, of course, but in particular in the way we share information that allows people to do their work safely in potentially unsafe environments. So that's a good way to start thinking about technical writing. This week you'll be reading a chapter from a textbook that shares some other potential definitions for technical writing. So I want you to think that there's not one idea of what technical writing is, but many different competing, well, not always competing, also complementary definitions of technical writing and different ways to approach the subject. So what counts as technical writing? Let's think about technical writing as a thing that's produced by a technical writer. Or by any kind of worker who is tasked with communicating technical information. So it could be anything as simple as everyday information like signs, labels, or instructions, all the way through lengthier, more complex documents. Historically, we thought of technical writing as like those people who wrote manuals or technical reports. But here we have an example. And it's a label from a bottle of balsamic herb vinaigrette dressing, so salad dressing. You'll notice that it includes things like a logo. It has content claims like no cholesterol. It has images or artwork, right, that show you what might be in balsamic herb vinaigrette, which looks like oil and vinegar. It gives descriptive information like product weight. It gives caloric value information, nutritional facts, It includes minerals, for example, that's in it. It includes manufacturing information, so you know where that bottle or can of dressing came from. It also has user information, for example, serving size. It's a suggestion of how much you should use as a user, and there are additional directions or suggestions that in this image are too blurry for us to see, but normally this is recommended use of this product for these reasons, right? A barcode and a UPC number. Remember, a barcode is a visual representation of additional information, so a computer can click that code, read that code, and access a great deal of more information that can be fit into that little part of the label. And of course, a list of ingredients. So all of these things taken together can form a fairly technical document that communicates a lot of complex information in a way that makes it easier for the user to understand. So we want to think about, we can also think about what genres of technical writing might exist. And genres, you might think traditionally of literary or musical genres, right? Different types of those kinds of writing or performance. When we think about technical writing, this is certainly not an exhaustive list, but a comprehensive one that says what kinds of documents technical writers are often tasked with writing. One of the most common is correspondence. That could be anything from an email to formal letters, memos, press releases, where you're communicating information between people either within an office or professional space or from that professional space out into a public space. Technical summaries. Executive summaries are very hot right now because people who work oftentimes don't have time to read complete texts, and they need instead the takeaways. So executive summaries do that, much like an abstract would do that in a scientific report, for example. But a resume can also be thought of as a summary or a curriculum vitae. So the idea of writing a resume is producing a summary of your achievements and your qualifications, right? Technical definitions and descriptions. What are things and what do they look like, or how are they, right? A label can be thought of as including both definitions and descriptions of the product. And other kinds of informational texts oftentimes fall into these areas. Electronic communication, which sometimes can be thought of as, be correspondence, right, like emails or summaries because they're digitized, et cetera, et cetera. But here we're talking about more how it's produced or where it's produced and how it's distributed and where it's distributed. So websites, social media posts. We'll talk a bit in this class about the idea of content. One of the areas of growth in technical writing is as a content writer. That is somebody who produces content for electronic sites. Technical processes, obviously, manuals, instructions. Something as simple as a recipe is a technical process in that it tells you what to do to produce something. Proposals, we'll talk very much about proposals towards the end of the semester, and both formal and informal reports, from white papers to research papers to giving presentations and so on. But the real question is, are all workplace writers technical writers then, right? Because in today's workforce, almost every writer is asked to communicate in some way within their organization, even though they're not officially called professional or technical writers, right? So a nurse, for example, engages in charting, right? Even if that nurse does not do any kind of public health work. Though they likely do, especially nowadays with our current pandemic situation. So how does that differ from a technical writer? Well, the job of a technical writer will depend on the industry and the workplace in which they're employed, of course, but they often work on multidisciplinary teams on which they function as the mediator between a more technical staff and a less technical reader. They work closely with the team to develop a communication strategy. And what this can ultimately mean is that technical writers can end up writing things like style manuals for entire organizations. So what they do is not the day-to-day communication that happens within an office among all the workers in that professional space, but instead set guidelines for more efficient and effective communication within the organization as a whole. So a professional writer might find themselves working at a very specific level, working with one team to produce one thing, or at a very general level, working with global issues of communication across an organization. We don't really notice technical writing if it's done well. We notice when it's done poorly. If you've ever tried to put together something following directions, you have likely found them to be wanting in some way. In this case, I have three examples of silly examples of signs. I like the first one, please, no ducks, with the ducks crossed out, as if ducks could read a sign and know to avoid this area. It is probably much more likely that that sign is meant to discourage people from bothering the ducks in some way, feeding the ducks or interacting with the ducks. In the second example, we see the misuse of a Venn diagram. A Venn diagram is that the two circles that overlap there on that chart. Venn diagrams are meant to show the ways in which two different or more than two different things overlap. In this case, China and the US are matching pace. You would expect to see perhaps a bar graph that would show that those investments are similar, but show the US slightly behind because we must keep up, right? In this case, it's a poorly chosen visual representation that confuses the reader. In the final example, if you look by the numbers, it looks like, oh, I'm getting a lot of information here about student use and perception of use of opiates, alcohol, etc. But when you look at the numbers, you'll see that all the bar graphs are the same size, but the numbers are very different. So once again, the visual representation of that data is confusing for the reader. What we don't want to do as a technical writer is do anything to confuse the reader about the information we're trying to give them, right? So, what are some of the concerns of good technical writing? We're going to start with the idea of problem solving. Problem solving will be a big thing we tackle beginning next week. We'll talk a little bit about it today, but we'll talk about ethics, we'll talk about audience, we'll talk about style, we'll talk about genre, presentation, collaboration, and rhetoric, which will guide much of the work we do as readers of technical writing this semester. So what is problem solving in technical rhetoric? Problem solving abilities are important for the workplace communicator. Workplace problems are best thought of as questions to be considered or addressed. Workplace documents are designed to solve all kinds of problems. Some documents help workers perform procedures safely and easily. Others may address problems such as deciding the future direction of a project. Even reports about events that have already happened may serve as a resource for future problem solvers. For some problems may be positive, such as addressing how a company can best capitalize on successes. In other words, we are writing as technical writers for a reason, and that in our job in writing that document, creating that document, is to address or solve the problem in some way. This could be as simple as we realize that there's been a lot of accidents in this area. We need to create signage that will prevent people from having those accidents, or create policy manuals that explain what you should not do or what you should do in a particular area to avoid those accidents. All of those are solving problems, right? So here we go. What about ethics in technical writing? Ethics is central to the role of a technical writer. Technical communicators often see themselves as advocates for users, but they must also remember that the documents they produce reflect on themselves and on the organizations they are writing for. In other words, technical writers must be aware of consequences in the real world. The work we do as technical writers is oftentimes public work, and that work then therefore reflects not only on us but on the business we work for. While it is very important we advocate for our users, right, that we make sure that the people we're writing for can actually use the document, it doesn't mean we can do whatever we want. We still have to be aware of the potential public audience of any document we create. What do we mean by ethics? We mean right or wrong, but right or wrong can be interpreted in lots of ways. And it's about a relationship between the writer and the user or reader, the audience, as well as the writer and the company or industry that he or she is representing, right? So we think about things like responsibility, trust, good behavior, having principles, maintaining relationships, allowing for choice, but encouraging the correct one, right, which is morality, and of course reliability. We'll talk about also the word credibility, right? So making your document seem trustworthy, okay? Audience in technical writing. Audience is always an important consideration for communicators in any case. In technical writing, we think that it's always designed to help readers achieve their goals. It is important to remember that workplace writers often must consider multiple audiences, right? Primary audiences such as technicians or customers who will use the document. Secondary audiences such as federal regulators who will be guided by the document. And even tertiary audiences such as future employees who may use the document as a model for their own writing. Some technical communicators like to see themselves as audience advocates, especially for usability issues. And one issue of usability we'll talk about a lot this semester is accessibility, and that is making sure the document is accessible to the widest possible audience in a number of ways. And this is a concern that grows out of disability studies and making documents useful for all audiences, but includes other concerns about accessibility that include the complexity of language, the choice of colors, typefaces, all kinds of different design issues, but also issues of content and the way we think about how we present that content. One of the most common ways we see that right now is in warnings about content so that audiences know what they're getting into before they get there and are disturbed by that content. Style in technical writing is oftentimes about clear, correct, concise language. That is the characteristic of a workplace writing style. Workplace writing is transactional. That is, it is designed to help people accomplish tasks, whether those tasks are mechanical processes or decision making. If the language choices get in the way of clear communication, the document is a failure, right? So this, in all this stuff, you'll notice it's starting to tie together, right? What is clear and correct and concise for certain audiences is not necessarily clear for others. If you're writing to a bunch of engineers, it's very different than if you're writing to me, an English professor. The kinds of language we use are always contextual, but being as clear, correct, and concise as possible always makes that writing stronger, in the sense that it's not, maybe not quite as beautiful and interesting as a short story or a poem, but that it is better in accomplishing its task of being useful to the reader. Genre in technical writing, right? Workplace writing genres are often first recognized by their use of conventions, the to, the from, the subject lines in a memo, for example. And while some conventional elements of a genre may seem arbitrary, it is useful to remember that they evolved over time in response to workplace needs. So, when you work in a business, oftentimes you'll find that you need to craft the same kind of document over and over again. For example, invoices always include this information, or memos always include this information. There's the great TPS report from Office Space, right? When they changed it and he's still using the old form and nobody wants to use the old form. Why is he not using the new form, right? They can seem arbitrary in that case, but ultimately these forms exist for a reason, and it is important that we match those expectations. The people who use these documents regularly know exactly what they're supposed to do and where to find the information they need. right? So an invoice that is out of order from a typical invoice makes it harder to be processed in the financial department of your business. We try to make those consistent then within each organization. Presentation and technical writing is something we'll talk about a lot. Presentation in this case is not necessarily about standing in front of people and presenting information, but instead thinking about the design and layout and appearance of the writing we do. Now, not all of us will become technical writers in places where we also do document design. Some of us will work at places that are large enough to have their own designers, and writers will be mostly responsible for the content produced there. However, it is important to think about these ideas when you think about documents, right? So color crayon tip is a great, in this case, an infographic for an approach to thinking about design. So thinking about color, contrast, repetition, arrangement, the why of what you're doing, organization, negative space, typography, iconography, and photography. Interesting ways, and we'll talk about these much more in detail as we move through the course. Collaboration in technical writing. Technical writers often work with subject matter experts, clients, and even production teams. In other words, technical writing is a collaborative field. I would argue that almost all writing and any public writing is collaborative. We all work with editors when we do our work. We work with colleagues and peers who help us develop our ideas. You'll work with one another through discussion boards at least. And so being open and willing and able to work with others will be a strength you can bring to any workplace. And your ability to collaborate effectively with people who are not necessarily writers, and you're not necessarily a subject matter expert in that area, is kind of where the traditional technical writer finds him or herself. That is, between the expert and the layperson, and that ability you develop to understand enough about the subject matter and work with that subject matter expert to communicate really complex and technical information to a non-technical user. Rhetoric is something we'll talk much more in detail about. You've likely heard of rhetoric at some point in your studies. Rhetoric provides an important framework for discussing workplace writing. A rhetorical approach helps writers and readers to recognize the interconnected nature of good writing. You'll recognize a lot here. Good writing solves problems, reflects credibility, affects an audience, meets expectations for genre, style, level of formality, level of detail, format, and length, produces from and for a variety of analog and digital technologies, gathers information from a variety of sources, uses appropriate forms and content, and pairs visual and written registers for effect. So rhetoric is this idea of looking at what's involved in communicating a message from an author to a reader, right, through a medium, through language. And so we'll be talking about that a lot as we think about, well, does this message meet the needs of the audience, meet the expectations of the genre or the context? Does it represent the author and the organization well? These are questions we're going to ask, and that's employing rhetoric in our analysis. Once we've been able to analyze how other things work or don't work well, then we can start to think about how those same considerations can guide our own work as producers of technical writing. So what is technical writing? Well, traditionally, we might have thought of technical writing as only professional writing that happens by professional writers. We might have defined technical writing as writing within specific technical fields like engineering or mathematics or natural sciences. We might have thought of technical writing as only the people who produce manuals and handbooks and instructions. But we might think about it more generally at this point of the semester and just think about technical writing as communication that helps audiences solve problems. So we're going to think about documents And when I say documents here, I mean any kind of composed message, purposefully composed message, right, that helps an audience solve a problem. Whether that's doing something that they don't know how to do, whether that's making a decision that they are not yet informed about, whether that's telling them how to move or where to go, all these messages that we're sending to different audiences. But is that too general? And this is what we'll be talking about during this semester, right? Is that really a fair definition or an accurate definition? Is it too general to describe what technical writing is? What about the word technical, right? What about the relationship to technical fields? What about the relationship to technology or technologies? What about the context in which technical writing is consumed and produced? Remember that idea of the difference between the subject matter experts and the people who will use that information in some way? What about the media through which technical writing is distributed and produced? What other questions do you have at this point? Well, if you have questions, please contact me. I'm here to help. You can post in the course. You can shoot me an email. I am available to you at, the nice thing about computer technologies is that I'm available to you pretty much all the time. So reach out. I'm here. Take care.